Tonight I want to reveal something that could change everything. And I do not say that to sound dramatic. I say it because some truths sit inside a man for years, quiet as a folded letter, until one night their weight becomes heavier than fear. I have lived long enough to win things I thought would heal me, lose things I thought I could never survive without, and stand in crowded rooms while feeling my soul was still alone. And you may not know why my voice is reaching for you, but I need you to understand this. I have begun to believe my life was not just moving forward, it was being guided. Not loudly, not with lightning in the sky, but through delays, rescues, and moments that looked like accidents until time turned them around. There was a night years ago when I should have kept driving. The road was empty, the city lights blurred by rain, and the windshield carried each drop like a trembling thought. I remember the tires on wet pavement, soft and constant, like a whisper trying to keep me awake. I was tired in a way sleep could not fix, tired of pretending success had answered questions my heart was still asking. Then my phone lit up on the seat beside me. One message. Nothing urgent, just the name, the past, appearing as mind drifted somewhere dangerous. I slowed down. A few seconds later, a car ran the red light ahead of me like a warning. I sat there, hands on the wheel, breath caught in my chest. I had no proof. But something in me whispered, pay attention. For a long time, I called it coincidence. Men like me explain everything with logic, discipline, cause and effect. We build systems because systems feel safer than surrender. But that night stayed with me because underneath the fear, there was a strange peace, as if something unseen had stepped between me and the version of my life that would have ended before this confession. Maybe you know that feeling too. Maybe there was a door you cried over when it closed, a message you almost ignored, a delay that made you angry, a silence that felt cruel, until later it began to feel like protection. If you have ever looked back and realized life was not rejecting you, only repositioning you, then you understand where my voice is coming from. After that, I started noticing things I had been too proud to notice. A flight I missed because I could not find my keys, only to hear later that the city I was heading toward had been swallowed by storms. A conversation I did not want became the reason I walked away from someone teaching me to abandon myself. The dream came 3 nights in a row, always the same. A quiet room, warm light, a woman turned slightly away from me, not leaving, just waiting for me to stop running from the life I was meant to enter. I would wake before seeing her face, but the feeling remained. It was recognition without evidence, grief and hope sitting at the same table. Each time I would lie there before morning and feel as if time itself was watching me. Somewhere in the middle of these signs, I stopped calling it coincidence. I did not become a preacher. I did not claim to understand God's handwriting. I only became too honest to pretend the pattern was not there. The wrong timing kept becoming right timing later. The people I lost taught me how not to lose myself. My loneliness made space for a presence I had not met yet, or maybe had met in some way my ordinary mind could not remember. And that is where you began to feel less like an imagined listener and more like someone woven into the page. Maybe you are sitting in silence with your tired heart. Maybe you have stopped believing that anything meant for you can still find you. But I am telling you softly, I have been late to many things and still arrived when I was supposed to. Tonight, I am not asking you to believe everything I believe. I am asking you to leave a small window open inside your heart for the possibility that your life has not been random either. That the heartbreaks did not empty you for nothing. That the missed chances, the almost smalls, the names you released, the prayers you whispered when nobody saw you, may have been moving you toward a moment you could not see yet. I have spent years becoming a man who could finally say this without hiding behind pride. I think you and I were written into the same script before we knew how to read it. And if that sounds impossible, maybe we are standing near the truth that all is impossible before it changes everything. I kept noticing the signs after that night, but I did not know what to do with them. So I did what many wounded men do when life becomes too mysterious. I became busier. I filled my days with work, decisions, noise, responsibilities, rooms full of people who needed something from me. And I told myself that meaning was something weak people searched for when they could not control outcomes. But late at night, when the house became quiet and the world stopped applauding or demanding, I would feel the same unseen hand pressing gently against my chest, as if heaven was not forcing me, only asking me to listen. There was one evening in particular, cold enough, when I found an an old notebook inside a drawer I had not opened in years. I had been looking for a document, something ordinary, something practical, but there it was beneath old receipts and forgotten keys. A notebook from a season when I still believed love would arrive easily. I opened it without thinking, and a dried flower fell onto the table, fragile, almost weightless, yet somehow it made the whole room feel alive. I remembered the day I placed it there. I remembered the sunlight, the promise I made to myself, the careless confidence of a younger man who thought time would wait for him. And then, beneath that flower, I saw one sentence I had written years earlier. Someday, she will understand why I had to become this man first. I sat there for a long time, not moving, because the words felt less like memory and more like a message I had sent forward to myself. I do not have proof that God places letters inside drawers for us to find at the exact moment we are Faraz if not find. At the exact moment we are ready, but that not feel random and tang. It felt like an appointment. Maybe you know what it is like to find something small that suddenly opens a door inside you. A photograph, a song, a sentence, a scent in the air that pulls you back to a version of yourself you thought was gone. Maybe your heart has also been visited by little things that were too perfectly timed to dismiss. I began to wonder if life speaks softly because it wants to know whether we are listening from fear or from faith. Then came another sign, one I almost ignored because it arrived through inconvenience. I was meant to meet someone important, someone who could have changed the direction of my career. And I was running late. The traffic stood still beneath a gray sky. Horns rising and falling like restless birds. And I remember gripping the steering wheel with that old anger, the kind that says everything is against me. Then, while trapped there, I saw an elderly man standing outside a closed shop, holding his chest, one hand against the wall, his face pale in the weak afternoon light. People passed him as if hurry had made them blind. I pulled over, helped him sit, called for help, and stayed until the ambulance came. I missed the meeting. I thought I had lost an opportunity. But months later, the same man's son contacted me, not knowing who I was at first, and that conversation opened a door far greater than the one I had been chasing. I remember laughing softly when I realized it, not because it was funny, but because something in me finally bowed. I stopped calling it coincidence. I realized I was being redirected, not punished. My delays were not always failures. They were instructions written in the language of inconvenience. And if you have been delayed, if life has made you wait longer than you thought your heart could survive, I need you to hear me tonight. Waiting does not always mean forgotten for day. Sometimes waiting means the road is being cleared of what would have broken you if you arrived too soon. I began to look at my loneliness differently after that. For years, I thought loneliness was proof that I had missed my chance, that I had worked too hard, loved too poorly, trusted too late, and become a man standing outside the life he secretly wanted. But the more I looked back, the more I saw how many times I had been pulled away from what looked beautiful but would have emptied me. There were people I wanted to keep who were teaching me to shrink. There were rooms I wanted to enter where my soul would have had to leave itself at the door. There were relationships that carried warmth on the surface, but no sacred shelter underneath. At the time, every ending felt like rejection. Now, I wonder if some endings were mercy wearing a painful face. I wonder if the universe kept closing doors because somewhere beyond my understanding, one door had your name on it. And I know that sounds like the language of a man who has been alone too long, but I am not speaking from fantasy. I am speaking from patterns, from narrow escapes, from perfectly wrong timing that later turned holy, from dreams that left me with peace instead of confusion. Sometimes I felt her before I could name her. Sometimes I would wake before dawn with the sense that someone out there was also being prepared, also being delayed, also being protected from choices that would make recognition impossible when the real moment came. Maybe that someone is you. Maybe you have been wondering why certain prayers were answered with silence, why people left before you were ready, why your heart kept returning to hope even after hope embarrassed you. Maybe life was not mocking you. Maybe it was making you ready to receive what would have frightened your younger self. Tonight, I can admit something I once would have hidden. I am beginning to believe my story has been the circling toward yours. Not quickly, not neatly, but faithfully. And if you feel even a small trembling truth in that, then perhaps the same quiet hand has been guiding us both. There was a season after those signs when everything I had built began to tremble, not from one great disaster, but from 1,000 small cracks I had refused to see. The days still look successful from the outside. Lights came on when I entered rooms. Hands reached for mine. Voices called my name with respect. And people assumed a man who could carry so much must also know where he was going. But inside, I was walking through a hallway with no windows, listening to doors shut behind me. One night, after a long day that should have made me proud, I stood alone in a hotel bathroom. The mirror clouded from a shower I had taken only to feel human again. And the Hurt City humming through the glass like a world that had no idea I was breaking. My phone was full of messages, yet none of them reached the place in me that needed to be held. I remember placing both hands on the sink and feeling something heavier than sadness, almost like a holy interruption. It was not a voice exactly, but a knowing that moved through me. You cannot keep being rescued from the outside, while abandoning yourself on the inside. I did not understand it then. I only knew the air felt different, still and charged, as if heaven had entered the room without opening the door. Maybe you have had a moment like that when your life looks acceptable to everyone else, but your soul quietly refuses to continue the performance. Maybe you smiled through a dinner, answered messages, did your work, took care of everyone, and then finally sat alone and felt the truth rise like water in your chest. That night became one of those appointments I did not ask for but could not miss. I had been chasing progress, yet destiny was asking for honesty. Soon after, a collapse came in a way I could not negotiate with. A plan I had trusted failed. A person I had defended betrayed the trust I placed in them. And an opportunity disappeared in one short call. I remember the sound of rain against the windows that morning, sharp, and restless, while I sat with the phone still warm in my hand. For a few minutes, I felt humiliated by life, as if all my effort had been exposed as fragile. Then, beneath the shock, came that strange peace again. Not happiness, not relief, just a quiet steadiness that did not match the situation. It frightened me a little because I knew I should have been angrier. Instead, something inside me whispered, "This is not the end of the road. This is the turn you kept refusing to take." I do not have proof that broken plans can be mercy, but I have lived long enough to know some losses arrive with hidden instructions. I began to see how often I had mistaken resistance for rejection. The doors that would not open were not mocking me. They were keeping me from rooms where I would have won the world and lost the last honest piece of myself. Around the middle of that collapse, I stopped asking why everything taken from me and started asking what I was being returned to. And that question changed the way I breathed. I realized I was not being destroyed. I was being interrupted before I became a stranger to my own heart. And somehow, in the silence after that realization, not as a face I could describe, but as a presence my future might require me to be ready for. I wondered whether I had been delayed because love, real love, cannot meet a man who is still pretending not to need it. I wondered whether my loneliness had been less like a prison and more like a room where my soul was being taught to hear again. If you have ever lost something you prayed to keep, maybe you know the ache of that lesson. Maybe you have watched a door close and felt ashamed of how badly you wanted it open. Maybe years later, you understood that what left was making space for what could finally stay. I am beginning to believe that destiny does not always sound like a promise. Sometimes it sounds like silence after a betrayal. Sometimes it looks like an empty chair across from you. Sometimes it feels like being pulled away from the life you begged for because God knew it would cost you the person you were becoming. After the collapse, my dreams changed. They were no longer vague rooms and fading light. I dreamed of a road at dawn, pale blue sky, the horizon glowing, and beside the road stood a woman in a simple dress, not waving, not calling, only looking in my direction as if she had known I would eventually arrive tired. I never saw her clearly, but I woke with tears in my eyes and a peace I could not explain. The dream followed me through the day. In meetings, in cars, in quiet elevators, I carried the feeling that someone was waiting on the other side of my surrender. Not waiting impatiently, not judging the years I had wasted, but standing within the design of time, trusting that every wrong turn had still been folded into the path. Maybe that is why I am speaking to you now with such care. Because if you are the woman listening, and if some part of you has felt late, unchosen, or forgotten, I want you to consider that perhaps you were not late at all. Perhaps you were protected from arriving before the right heart could recognize you. Perhaps we were both being slowed by hands we could not see, not to punish us, but to make sure that when our lives finally touched, We would not mistake the miracle for another ordinary moment. After the collapse, the world became quieter, but not kinder at first. Silence has a way of making a man hear everything he avoided when life was loud. I would wake before sunrise when the windows were dark and the room carried that blue-hour loneliness, and I would not remember what had fallen apart. Then memory would return softly, like cold water touching my chest. The phone would be there on the table, blank, no voice saying I was not alone. Outside, a bus would pass, its brakes sighing into the empty street, and I would lie still, listening to life continue, without asking whether I was ready. In those mornings, I felt guided and abandoned at the same time. I believed something had saved me from roads I should not have taken, yet I could not understand why saved still felt so lonely. I would make coffee and stand near the kitchen window. Something in me would whisper, stay. Not stay in pain, but stay innocent. Stay awake, stay honest. I do not have proof that loneliness can be holy, but those mornings did not feel empty. They felt like a room being prepared for someone I had not yet met. Maybe you know that kind of loneliness. Maybe you have sat in your quiet and felt as if life was holding back an answer, not because it was cruel, but because the answer needed a deeper place inside you to land. There was a hospital room during that season that I still cannot forget. I had gone to visit someone older than me, a man who had once seemed unbreakable. And I found him lying beneath pale sheets while machines kept time with small beeps. The room smelled of antiseptic, wilted flowers, and the strange patience of places where people tell the truth because pretending no longer has strength. He took my fingers lighter than I remembered and said, "Don't confuse being needed with being loved." I looked away because the words found me quickly. Outside the window, afternoon light touched another building, gold and quiet, and for a moment everything inside me became still. I had spent years being useful, impressive, available, strong, reliable, and secretly starving. I had let people admire the armor because I was afraid no one would stay for the man underneath it. When I left the hospital, the hallway seemed longer than it had been when I entered. Each step sounded like a question. By the elevator, I saw a woman holding a bouquet, crying silently, just with the exhausted dignity of someone who had been brave too long. I never knew her name, but I carried her face with me for days. I wondered if you had ever cried that way, quietly. because your heart had learned not to disturb anyone with its pain. That visit felt less like an errand and more like another appointment. It made me realize that destiny was not only redirecting my circumstances, it was stripping away my false definitions of love. Somewhere near the middle of that season, I stopped believing my loneliness was punishment. I realized it was preparation, fright uns mies, because preparation means something is coming. And hope can feel dangerous to a heart that has learned survival. I began to notice how often I had chosen people who could receive my strength, but not my tenderness. I saw how I had hidden behind achievement because achievement never asked me to be emotionally naked. It only asked me to perform, produce, solve, carry. But real love, the kind I was beginning to believe had your shadow inside it, would not be impressed by the mask. It would look through the success and ask if I was still willing to be human. One night, after returning from a dinner where everyone laughed and praised things I no longer cared about, I sat in my car outside my house and could not make myself go inside. Rain moved gently over the windshield, turning streetlights into blurred hollows. I put my head back and closed my eyes. Suddenly I felt that same strange peace, the kind that arrives without permission in the middle of sadness. It felt like being pulled back from the edge of a life that looked full but was spiritually vacant. And in that stillness, I thought of you again, not as a fantasy, not as a rescue, but as a possibility that required me to become honest before I could be entrusted with you. If you are listening with a tired heart, maybe you understand why this part of the story matters. Maybe you too have been admired for your strength, while secret wishing someone would notice the places where you were barely holding together. Maybe you have wondered why love kept arriving in versions that needed you, used you, praised you, but did not truly see you. I want to tell you something. I am only beginning to live. Being unseen by the wrong people does not mean you are invisible. Sometimes it is protection. Sometimes the soul refuses to be recognized by hands that would not know how to hold it. I think my life kept circling me back to loneliness because I had to stop begging for warmth from rooms that were never meant to become home. And perhaps your life has done the same. Perhaps the closed doors, delayed answers, almost loves, and long nights were not evidence that destiny forgot you. Perhaps they were keeping something sacred untouched until the appointed moment. I do not know how close we are to that moment, but I feel less lost when I speak to you. I feel as if every quiet morning, every hospital hallway, every rain-covered windshield, every ache I could not explain has been teaching me the same truth. The heart can be late. There came a point when the loneliness stopped feeling like an empty room and started feeling like a doorway. And I know that sounds strange unless you have lived long enough with your own silence to hear it change its language. At first, it sounded like punishment. The absence of footsteps in the hallway, the untouched cup across the table, the quiet after everyone had gone home, and I was left with the version of myself no one applauded. But one winter evening, while the city outside was wrapped in fog and the lamps along the street looked like small moons trying to stay alive, I sat beside the window with no music, no phone, no distraction, and I felt something shift. The house was silent, yet it did not feel abandoned. It felt as if someone had just left the room before I turned around, as if the air still carried the warmth of a presence I could not name. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Who are you?" I was not speaking to the walls. I was speaking to the feeling that had followed me through airports, hospitals, rain, and dreams. I did not hear an answer, but I felt the same strange peace settle over me, gentle and exact. I do not have proof that souls can recognize each other before circumstances do. But that night, I began to wonder whether someone was not only ahead of me in time, but connected to me through it. Maybe you have felt that too. A longing that does not seem attached to anyone you know, a tenderness that arrives without a face, a sense that your heart is missing not a person from the past, but someone from the future. A few days later, another sign arrived, almost too ordinary to notice. I was walking through a bookstore after a meeting had been canceled, one of those cancellations that would have irritated me before. But by then, I had learned to watch delays with softer eyes. The store smelled of paper, dust, and coffee, and rain tapped the windows like fingers asking to come in. I picked up a book without reading the cover, opened it to the middle, and there on the page was a sentence about two people being guided toward each other by everything that once pulled them apart. I stood there, holding the book as the world continued, while something inside me went still. Years before, I would have smiled at the coincidences and put the book back. This time, I bought it without understanding why. I am not saying books or numbers control destiny. I am saying that when the same small pattern follows you long enough, it becomes difficult to keep calling your attention an accident. Enough. Around the middle of that season, I admitted that made me feel both foolish and free. I was no longer waiting for life to become logical before I believed it was meaningful. I realized I had been trained to trust only what I could explain, and that had made me blind to what I could feel. My life had not simply been delaying me. It had been tuning me. Each disappointment had lowered the volume of my ego. Each closed door had moved me away from the noise. Each heartbreak had taught me to recognize a love that would not require me to abandon my own soul. And in that recognition, you became more real to me, not because I knew your name or your face or the road that would bring you near, but because my heart began making room for someone specific. I stopped praying for anyone to arrive and began praying to be ready for the one who was already being written toward me. If you are listening now and you have carried a loneliness you could not explain, maybe this is why your heart never fully settled for what was almost right. Maybe you were not difficult to love. Maybe you were being kept from the wrong kind of belonging. Maybe every time life made you feel unseen, it was refusing to let your deepest self be wasted on eyes that could not recognize the sacredness in you. I know what it means to be praised, and still not known. I know what it means to have people close enough to touch you, but not close enough to understand why your silence changed. I wonder if you have mistaken your delay for proof that love passed you by, when perhaps love was circling carefully, waiting until both of us had been softened enough not to ruin what was being given. One night after the bookstore, I dreamed again. This time there was no road, no distant figure, no face turned away. There was only a table near a window, morning light pouring across it, 2 cups of coffee, and a silence so peaceful it made me ache when I woke. Just 2 people sitting in a quiet room, as if the war inside them had finally ended. I woke before sunrise with tears already on my face, and I understood something that humbled me. I did not want destiny because it sounded magical. I wanted it because I was tired of surviving without a witness. I wanted a life where peace did not feel temporary. I wanted a woman whose presence felt less like escape and more like arrival. And somehow I felt that the woman might be you. Not because I am trying to place a burden on your heart, but because everything in me has been moving toward this confession. If your life has ever circled you back to hope after you swore you were done hoping, then maybe you know why I am not ashamed to say this anymore. Some appointments do not appear on calendars. Some promises are carried through storms. Some people are not found quickly because until recognition can happen without fear. By the time I began to recognize my own patterns, the signs became sharper, not louder, almost as if life knew I had stopped arguing with every warning. I started seeing the same lesson in different clothes. A door would open, and my old hunger for approval would step toward it before my soul did. A voice would praise me, and some frightened part of me would want to believe. Praise was the same as safety. A familiar woman would enter my orbit, beautiful in the way storms can be beautiful. And for a moment, I would feel the old pull, the old ache to prove I was worth staying for. Then something would interrupt me. A sudden silence. A missed call, a dream, a heaviness in my chest that did not feel like fear so much as protection. I remember one evening at a restaurant, warm light on the table, soft music moves through the room, and someone across from me saying all the right things. She admired the life I had built, the discipline, the success, the image. But when I spoke about loneliness, her eyes drifted away for half a second. And that half second told me more than all her compliments. I felt the air change. I felt that invisible hand again, gentle but firm, pulling me back. Years earlier, I would have ignored it. I would have chosen attention and called it connection. That night, I drove home alone under a dark violet sky, and instead of feeling rejected, I felt spared. I do not have proof that the soul can recognize danger before the mind can name it, but my peace had become wiser than desire. Maybe you know what I mean. Maybe you have met people who looked like answers until your spirit grew quiet around them, not peaceful, just quiet in the way a bird becomes still before a storm. Maybe you kept choosing what felt familiar because familiar pain can feel less frightening than unfamiliar peace. I began to see how much of my life had been shaped by sabotage disguised as preference. I wanted love, but I kept standing close to situations where love could never breathe. I wanted to be known, but I hid the parts of me that needed knowing. I wanted destiny, but I kept trying to manage it like a business plan, as if God needed my fear to organize timing. Then came a night that broke through my excuses. I had fallen asleep on the sofa with a book open on my chest, and I dreamed I was standing in an old train station. The ceiling was high. The floor shone with rain carried in from outside, and the departure board kept changing before I could read it. People moved past me in blurred coats, everyone going somewhere, everyone certain. I looked down and saw a ticket in my hand with no destination, only one word printed where the city should have been: ready. When I woke, the room was dark except for the small lamp beside me, and my heart was beating as if I had been called by name. So I sat there, breathing slowly, and understood that I had spent years asking when she would come, while life had been asking when I would stop running from the man I needed to become before she could arrive. Around the middle of that realization, something inside me surrendered. I stopped blaming timing for what my own fear had delayed. I stopped calling every lost connection destiny when some were mirrors showing me where I still did not love myself honestly. That was hard to admit. A man can survive public failure more easily than private truth. But the truth was this: I had been afraid that if real love came, it would see all the rooms I had kept locked. It would see the boy still waiting to be chosen, the man still grieving what he never said, the heart still expecting abandonment even in tenderness. And yet, the more I admitted this, the more your presence seemed to draw nearer, not as pressure, but as mercy. It felt as if someone on the other side of time was not asking me to be perfect, only true. If you are listening, maybe you understand that preparation. Maybe life has shown you your own patterns too, the way you give too much to be kept, the way you smile when tired, the way you test love because a part of you expects it to leave. Maybe you have mistaken your defenses for wisdom, when really they were old wounds wearing armor. I am not judging you for that. I have worn my armor so long it sometimes felt like skin. But destiny, if it is real, does not only bring people together, it heals what would make them hurt each other when they finally to meet. That is what I think was happening to me. Every delayed answer, every warning, every person I was pulled back from, every dream that felt more like message than noise was teaching me how not to destroy the gift when it arrived. One morning after that train station woke, the air was cold, clean, almost silver. Few birds crossed the pale sky, and the street was empty, except for a woman sweeping leaves from doorway of a small chapel. The sound of the broom against stones was ordinary, yet I stopped because it felt like a symbol I was meant to see. Clearing the entrance, making room, preparing the threshold. I stood there longer than I should have, and tenderness moved through me quietly. I thought of you with certainty that did not need your face. I thought perhaps she is also clearing space. Perhaps she is learning to trust the door again. Perhaps neither of us is late. Perhaps we are both being made ready at the exact speed mercy requires. I began to understand timing differently after that morning by the chapel, as if something in me had finally stopped fighting calendars and started trusting the hands behind it. I used to believe delay was an insult, that if something was meant for me, it would arrive quickly, cleanly, without all the waiting. That makes a heart question its worth. But then I started seeing how the most meaningful things in my life had never arrived when my pride demanded them. They came after I had been softened. They came after I had lost the need to control rooms. They came after I had been humbled enough to receive them without trying to own them. There was a day when I returned to a place I had avoided for years, a quiet garden where I once made a promise to someone I did not become. The benches were damp from rain, the leaves shone as if the world had been washed, and a fountain in the center kept spilling water into itself over and over, like time repeating a lesson until it was understood. I sat there listening to the water, and I remembered how certain I had once been by not choosing faster, speaking sooner, trusting more bravely. But as I watched one leaf detach and land gently on the path, I felt that strange peace again. It did not erase regret. It simply stood beside it. It felt like life was saying, even your late understanding was part of the road. I do not have proof that regret can become guidance, but that morning I felt my past changing shape. It was no longer only a graveyard of missed chances. It became a map. Maybe you have a place like that, a season you avoid because it holds the version of you who did not know how to choose yourself. Maybe you have thought your mistakes disqualified you from the kind of love that feels sacred. I used to think that too. I thought destiny only belonged to the people who got everything right early, the ones who loved cleanly, spoke clearly, never wasted years learning through pain. But now I believe destiny is kinder than that. I think it finds us through the detours we are ashamed of, and sometimes uses the roads we regret to bring us closer to what is true. Around the middle of that season, I stopped something that betrayed timing. I began to see it as a teacher with a quiet face. I realized that what felt late to me may have been mercy to someone else. Perhaps if I had met you earlier, I would have admired you without knowing how to honor you. Perhaps I would have wanted your light while still hiding in my shadows. Perhaps I would have called it love while asking you to carry the weight of wounds I had not yet faced. That realization humbled me more than failure ever could. It made me grateful for that I cursed, because those years taught me how fragile, a tender heart can be in careless hands. One night after that garden visit, I found myself driving. The streets were empty, the moon was thin, and the radio played a song I had not heard since a younger version of me believed longing was something to conquer. I almost changed it, but my hand stopped before touching the button. The lyrics were about someone waiting across times, and suddenly I was not just hearing music, I was hearing a pattern. The missed flight, the hospital room, the bookstore sentence, the chapel doorway, the dream of the table, the train ticket marked ready. All of it gathered inside me like stars arranging into a shape. I pulled over and let the song finish. I did not cry loudly. I only felt tears come with the quiet acceptance of a man who could no longer pretend he was not being led. In that parked car, with the engine ticking softly and the night wrapped around me, I whispered, "If she is real, make me gentle enough to recognize her." I was not asking for romance the way the world sells it. I was asking for recognition that does not need performance. I was asking to be trusted with a soul, not just desired by a body. And if you are listening now, maybe you have prayed in your own way too, not with perfect words, but with the ache beneath them. Maybe you have asked not just to be loved, but to be recognized without having to beg, chosen without having to prove, held without having to become smaller. I want you to know that I believe those prayers travel farther than we think. I believe they move through the unseen and find the people being prepared to answer them. That is why I am no longer ashamed of hope. Hope used to feel like weakness to me, like leaving the door open for disappointment. Now, it feels like courage wearing a softer name. It takes courage to believe after the wrong people taught you doubt. It takes courage to stay kind. Life has given you reasons to harden. It takes courage to let timing breathe instead of gripping every possibility with panic. And maybe that's just what we have both been learning separately. Maybe you have been learning not to close your heart because it was once entered carelessly. Maybe I have been learning not to run from tenderness just because it asks me to be seen. Perhaps all of this has been moving us toward a shared quiet, where none of us has to pretend the journey was easy, only that it mattered. Tonight, when I think of you, I do not imagine a perfect arrival. I imagine two people sitting with all their years between them, and somehow every broken road becomes less wasted. By then, you were no longer only a feeling at the edge of my prayers. You had become the quiet meaning behind so many things I once misunderstood. I began to look back at my life and see how often I had been brought near the wrong doors, only to learn the shape of the right one. There was one evening when I walked through a crowded station, the air full of footsteps, announcements, coffee, rain on coats, and that restless sound of people trying not to miss what matters. I was there early for once, almost an hour early, and I remember smiling because for most of my life I had felt late to everything sacred, late to honesty, late to healing, late to love. Then, across the platform, I saw a woman reading beside a pillar, her face half hidden by soft light, and for one breath, my whole body became still. It was not because I knew her. It was because something in the moment felt familiar, like a dream had briefly stepped into the world. She looked up, not at me, but past me, and the train arrived between us with a rush of wind so strong it felt like time closing a curtain. When it passed, she was gone. I stood there with my ticket in my hand, heart strangely calm, and I understood that recognition does not always mean possession. Sometimes it is only life teaching you how close destiny can feel before it fully arrives. Around the middle of that night, sitting on the train with darkness moving outside the window, I stopped asking whether you were real in the way the world demands proof. I realized you were already real in the way my life had been preparing space for you. Every escape, every silence, every closed door, every prayer I could not finish had been shaping me toward a woman I would not be able to treat casually. Maybe that woman is you, listening now with a heart that has also felt delayed, protected, misunderstood, almost forgotten. Maybe you too have sensed that certain people left because they were never meant to know the final version of you. I want you to believe this with me, even softly. Some souls are not late. They are hidden until the right eyes can see them. And tonight, when I speak to you, I feel as if the script is no longer only mine. I feel your page turning beside mine. And now I feel as if I am standing at the threshold of something I can no longer hide from. Not because I understand every sign, but because I have seen enough to know that my life has been speaking in a language deeper than logic. I used to think destiny would arrive with certainty, with a clear road, with all fear removed. But it has come to me more like candlelight in a dark room, small, steady, impossible to ignore once my eyes adjusted. There was a night recently when I stood outside beneath a sky full of quiet stars, the air cool against my face, the world still enough that even my breathing felt loud. I had spent the day carrying responsibilities, answering people, being the man everyone expected. But under that sky, I felt like a child again, asking the universe whether it had really been guiding me toward you, or whether my heart was only trying to give meaning to its ache. Then a wind moved through the trees, soft and sudden, and I felt that strange peace I have come to recognize. Not an answer with words, but a stillness that seemed to say, trust what survived your doubt. Around the middle of that silence, I understood that I was not being asked to prove destiny before choosing hope. I was being asked to choose hope because destiny had already carried me through what should have hardened me. Every heartbreak had tried to close me, yet here I am speaking to you with my heart open. Every delay had tried to shame me, yet here I am, believing I may have been exactly on time. Every loss had tried to convince me love was gone, yet here I am, feeling you near in a way I cannot explain without sounding like a man humbled by something sacred. If you are listening tonight, I am not asking you to run toward me blindly. I am asking you to look at your own life and notice the quiet pattern. The people who left, the doors that shut, the dreams that returned, the peace that appeared when everything should have been chaos. Maybe your life has been guiding you too. Maybe you were not abandoned in the waiting. Maybe you were being kept for a moment where love would not ask you to disappear. And if my voice has reached some hidden room inside you, then perhaps this is not an accident either. Perhaps this is another appointment, gentle, unexpected, written before either of us knew how to arrive. So tonight I finally accept what I spent years trying to explain away. Destiny did not bring me here by force, but by mercy. It let me survive roads that could have ended me, lose doors that would have emptied me, chances never emptied me, missed chances that were never truly mine, and arrive here with a heart bruised enough to be honest. I look back now and see the rain on the windshield, the hospital hallway, the quiet chapel doorway, the dreams that felt like messages, the strange peace that kept appearing in the middle of chaos. And I no longer ask whether it was all random. I know what my soul knows. I was being guided toward a love that would not simply excite me, but steady me. I was prepared for a woman who would not be a trophy, a fantasy, or an escape, but a place where my spirit could finally exhale. And if that woman is you, I want you to understand something gently. You were never too late. Not for love, not for healing, not for the kind of peace that does not demand. You become smaller to keep it. Maybe you also had to walk through almosts, endings, delays, and silent nights so that when something real stood before you, you would recognize it not by noise, but by calm. I am not offering you a perfect story. I am offering you a truthful one. I imagine us not as two people running from loneliness, but as two souls sitting beside a quiet window after the storm, drinking coffee while morning light touches the room, knowing that everything we survived did not make us less worthy. It made us softer, wiser, more careful with what is sacred. I choose to believe that the script was always moving this way, that every wrong turn still knew the road home, that every delay was carrying us toward an appointed hour. And tonight, I choose you not as a dream I invented, but as a hope I am finally brave enough to hold. So if your heart felt seen in this, stay close to this space. Scribes, subscribe, share this with someone still waiting, or leave your story below, not for attention, but so the hearts who feel forgotten can remember they are not alone. Sometimes destiny speaks through another person's confession, and maybe tonight it was speaking to you.